Welcome everyone. Glad you're all here today. The way of announcements, I don't think we have many. Don't think we have any, honestly, this week at least. We are getting close to the end of the year. Next week we're still going to have another talk like we normally do, but then the week after that will be our end of the year party with like board games and stuff like that. So we'll still have a meeting for people who want to come, but it won't be a normal meeting.
What board games?
Game night.
Whatever people bring.
Oh, okay.
People will bring about 100 different ones because that's the kind of friend group we have.
What's the favorite?
Depends on the group size.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Y'all play Catan?
Catan usually shows up.
It does.
Yeah.
Yep. I can bring Space Catan.
But anyway.
Probably Blood on the Clock Tower.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we'll have
We
a
might
lot
need
of
a
time
large
for it.
May not be
that
enough,
would actually
yeah.
work, but
Anyway,
Be bigger.
it will at least be.
it will be there, of course. Probably 2 copies of it. Alrighty. Well,
Sorry, I got distracted.
I'll go ahead and leave it over to our speaker.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I'm Steve, and I teach at Presswood Christian Academy during the day. That pays the bills because y'all don't pay me jack squat. I've been coming here for so many years now. I'm giving me nothing, you know. But I do appreciate coming out here and being able to speak on different subjects. I think I was here about a month ago, and I was talking on the resurrection at that time. So I had to write it up on the board and everything. It was a lot of fun. But tonight we got a really easy, lighthearted topic called the problem of evil. All right. So I remember years ago, y'all have probably heard of Josh McDowell, right? Famous apologist. He has a son named Sean McDowell, sort of taking his place, and he's real popular. And he edited a book called the Apologetic Study Bible for Students. And different people wrote like little page articles. I said, yeah, I could do that. And he goes, yeah, you write on the problem of evil. I was like, you gave me the easiest topic in the whole stinking Bible, and I got 1 page to talk about it. I was like, yeah, Sean, you got me to do it because you didn't want to do it. So hopefully he hears that, on Facebook. Is this going out live?
Yeah.
Is it recorded or just live?
Very live.
Okay, well, he's not watching, he's got more important things to do. All right, but anyway, it's going to be talking about the problem of evil tonight, is what I'm going to do. It's a very ancient problem. Epicurus, an ancient Greek philosopher, put it like this: if God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he's not all powerful. If he's able to prevent evil but not willing, then he's not good. But if he's both willing and able, how can evil exist? If he's neither able nor willing, then just why call him God? So we seem to have this tension between 3 assertions that actually Christians make, or even just generally theists make itself. They believe that God is all powerful, and if he's all powerful, he should be able to get rid of what? Evil. He's all good, which means God should desire to do what? Get rid of evil. But what exists? Evil exists. All I got to do is look around the room, say I have to teach, and I go, yes, my life is full of evil and suffering. Not here, but at my high school, where I teach, because at least, it's just awful who I have to teach. But anyways, a couple of definitions very quickly, and then I'm going to try to go into 2 different arguments against God's existence utilized by evil. All right, couple of definitions here. One is, if we're going to talk about evil, might as well define it. Right? What evil is. Evil is a deviation from some absolute standard of good itself. So evil and good are not at the same footing. All right? You can have the good without evil, but there is no evil without the good, because that's how you measure something as evil. It's the lack of the good. And if you want to get really philosophical about it, the very Platonic and Aristotelian concept of good is existence is good, and evil is the absence of existence. And if you just sort of think about instances of evil, it's not really a thing, it's the absence of a thing. Like blindness is the absence of what? Sight. Death is the absence of life. Lying is the absence of truth. My paycheck is the absence of money. Thank you very much. All right? So yes. My students' lack of intelligence. You just keep on going. Just so many examples of evil is the lack of the good. It's actually a lack of something. Sometimes they compare it to like the sun and a shadow. You can have the sun without the shadow, but there is no shadow without the sun or a light source. That's going on. So you can have good without the evil, but you can't have evil if there is no absolute standard of the good. There's two types of evil: moral evil, natural evil. I'm not going to focus too much on this, but moral evils arising from human activity, natural evils arising from natural activity. Pretty self-explanatory. So murder is an example of moral evil. A tornado would be an example of. All right, and so a hurricane would be an example of natural evil, right? My paycheck is an example of. Yeah, exactly. They made the choice not to pay me. Is what they did. It always comes back to the money, So, but anyways, that's more. What about a fire, though? Is that moral evil or natural evil?
Depends. Was there arson?
Yeah, if it's an arson, then it's
Moral evil.
But if it's a lightning strike, then it's natural evil. All right, then there's justified versus unjustified evils, which we'll talk a little bit more in a bit. But a simple definition of unjustified evil is evil, pain, or suffering with no greater compensating good attached to it. All right, that it's unjustified. Right? So there might be evils that are justified. For example, when you usually you don't want to get cut by a knife, do you? All right, because that's evil, right? The lack of healthy cells, right? Unless you're going where? Say it again? Surgery. And you elect to go under the knife because it's still evil. It's cutting you open. It's causing a lack of healthy cells bonding together. But it's to prevent a worse evil from occurring or to bring about a greater good, like a better quality of life or the like. But unjustified evils, just don't. If you got rid of it, that evil, you're not losing any greater compensating good, attached to it. There's two broad approaches to the problem of evil. There is the intellectual problem of evil versus the emotional problem of evil. I think this is probably the most important distinction that I can make in grappling philosophically with the problem of evil itself. The intellectual problem of evil, sometimes called the academic philosophical problem. It deals with the existence of evil in general and how can the existence of God be squared with the existence of evil. This is just thinking about evil. Right? C.S. Lewis wrote a book about this called The Problem of Pain. It's his philosophical analysis on evil itself. And then there's experiencing evil. And sometimes it's called the emotional problem of evil, religious evil, the existential problem of evil, where you're actually going through an instance of evil. You're not sitting around talking about it. It might be the case that you're sitting here going, yes, you are such a bad teacher. I am experiencing evil sitting under your lecture right now. Not that we're just talking about it, but you're experiencing it, is what you're doing. So dealing with a particular instance or occurrence of evil in someone's life where the sufferer is unable to reconcile what's happening in their life with the view of God's love and power. It's interesting, while we can make this distinction between the intellectual, and I tend to call it the intellectual versus emotional problem of evil, it's sort of like two sides of the same coin. You can make the distinction, but you really can't separate them, can you? Right? You can look at one side or the other, but always underneath it, there's that other part of it. So for example, we're talking about evil. That's thinking about it. So we're dealing with the intellectual problem of evil tonight, but you might be thinking, you are an absolute awful presenter, Steve. And that would be experiencing evil simultaneously as the event is going on. So you can make a distinction, between things itself. Now, given that we're at UTD, we're at reasonable faith, which one do you think I'm going to focus on?
Intellectual.
Yeah, that's where I'm going to go. All right, and I'll just be blunt. I think the intellectual problem is actually the easier to deal with, quite honestly. The emotional problem of evil, because I'm going to reveal my hand. I think I'm going to destroy any really good arguments against God's existence utilizing evil. All right, I think I'm going to do that in the next about 35 minutes, 40 minutes. I think I'm going to be able. That's going to be my attempt. And let's say I'm successful at my attempt of destroying any good intellectual argument against God's existence that utilizes evil. But does that make evil go away? No, you got to go out and live your crappy life. I got to go back to Garland. That's where I live. And living in Garland is evil. Right? Anybody from Garland? You are? You know exactly what I mean. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you, man? That's awful. That's why you got out, didn't you? All right? I'm still trying to get out, but don't freaking pay enough because that's evil. All right? My paycheck is evil, right? So when did you get out?
Like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it just sounds awful, doesn't it? It's just an awful place. You know, as bad as Garland is, we have one thing. At least we're not Mesquite. You know, I mean, at least we got that right there. You know, there's actually a T-shirt that actually says that. I'm being Garland, but at least I'm not a Mesquite. All right, so anyways, we're going to be focused on the intellectual problem of evil. And there are two forms of the intellectual problem of evil, or two ways to formulate an argument from evil against God's existence. There is the logical problem of evil, which is assessing the claim that traditional concepts of God are inconsistent or logically contradictory, and that's the key word right there, is contradictory with God. That these three claims, God's all powerful, God is all good, evil exists, you can formulate a logical contradiction there. And this appears to be a contradictory, inconsistent set of claims. And then there's the evidential form of the problem of evil. We're going to look at both of these tonight. And the evidential problem of evil is evil that offers strong evidence against God's existence. Evil's existence makes it unlikely, not impossible, like the logical problem of evil, but unlikely. All right, sort of elaborate on these two a little bit more. The logical problem of evil, which the key is contradiction, is like calling someone a married bachelor. All right, if I said, hey, look at that married bachelor walking down the hall, no one would look because those are logically impossible, right? They're contradictory, you know. But if I actually came in to the class, I'd say, am I a bachelor or a married individual? I said, well, I don't know. It's logically possible that you're either one, you know, but given the evidence, I got a ring on, you know, let's say I call my wife, you know, or if I brought my wife, not that she want to come here, she knows how evil this is, you know, and things like that, you know. I could get like my wedding, you know, certificate, show you the video, you know, and the like, and you're like, you know what, it's not impossible that you're a bachelor. You know, maybe you're trying to fool everyone into thinking you're married, but it's very, very unlikely that you're a bachelor individual itself. And that's what the evidential problem of evil says. It's like, okay, it's not impossible that God exists, but given the type or amount or extent of evil, you know, however you sort of tease it out, it makes it unlikely that God exists. You know, sort of like, yeah, it's possible aliens exist. It's right now, it's looking really unlikely, you know. I mean, we just have no real good reason, you know, to think it as well. All right, so that being said, here's sort of like a graph of how this works, right? So you sort of see it mapped out. You got evil, the absence of the good. You can have moral evil and natural evils, and that's what causes, you know, evils. You have justified or unjustified evils, and you can actually mix and match those. That's what philosophers do. They sit around and go, what is a morally justified evil? What is a morally unjustified evil? What is a natural justified evil or an unnatural unjustified evil? You know, and any other ways you can mix and match or add up to, you know, to it. We got the emotional, which is experience evil, intellectual, which is thinking about evil. Our focus, again, is going to be the intellectual, thinking about it. And there's two ways to formulate an argument against God from evil. There's a logical and the evidential. The logical stating that God is evil or contradictory, while evidential says evil makes it unlikely that God exists. All right, so let's take a look at the logical problem of evil first. All right, here's the sort of the basic syllogism that's very traditional. It says, premise one, if God exists, there can be no evil. See how they're contradictory right there? Evil exists, conclusion, therefore God does not exist. All right, given that this is reasonable faith, part of the Christian tradition, you're probably going to deny premise two, right? I mean, they talk about sin in the Bible, you know, and things like that. You know, so it sort of seems sort of a non-starter to just say, premise two is not true. Evil doesn't exist. But there are some actual traditions and moves that do deny premise two. Right? The pantheistic religions of Hinduism and Buddhism do go this route. There is no evil. Evil does not exist. It's just an illusion. There's this weird, older, new religion. You can't say cult anymore because it's too derogatory according to the academic world. You got to say new religious movement. So I'm going to continue to use the word cult because I like being derogatory. It's sort of fun, right? Especially when they come to my door. All right, say, hey, I'm part of the Jehovah's Witness. You ever heard of us? Yes, you're a cult. You know, so come on in. You know, so that's what I do. My wife hates it. She hates it. But anyways, the Christian Science, which is a much older, you know, cult, and it's sort of dying off. It's not real popular. It was sort of based in Boston for a while. They had the mother church there, but they had to sell it because they were just running out of money. But they actually deny that evil, pain, suffering exists as well. But in the traditional Christian sense, in the Roman Catholic or Orthodox or Protestant tradition, they're not going to deny premise 2. All right? So really, premise 1 is what you got to look at. If God exists, there could be no evil. So let me explain each premise real briefly, of which I think I actually did already. But the first premise is saying it's irrational or logically impossible for both God and evil to exist. God cannot possibly exist if evil exists, or vice versa. If God exists, there would be no evil. All right. Premise 2 says we see, experience, and encounter evil in the world. Conclusion: so God must not exist, given that evil exists, because God would not allow any evil to exist. All right. So there is a critique to this argument. We got to ask the question: is premise 1 true? Remember, premise 1 said if God exists, there can be no evil. All right, is what it's stating. Is that a necessarily true statement? If it is, come on in, guys. We've got an empty front row, and for you. We're just talking about easy subjects like the problem of evil. All right, so if it is true that if God exists, there can be no evil, I want you to understand what that statement is saying. It means there is no possible way to fit those claims together. All right, if God exists, how much evil should exist? None whatsoever. There can be no evil. There is no good reason to allow any evil of any kind if God exists, according to the logical version of this argument. So this actually reveals the strategy. The only thing a theist must do is show some possible way for God and evil to exist. It doesn't even have to be true. It just has to be logically possible, because they're the one that says it is logically impossible for God to exist and evil to exist. No logical possible way. So all I got to do is show one instance there God is allowed or is justified in allowing evil. All right? That's all you got to do. I don't have to explain all the evil in the world. I wouldn't have to explain most of the evil or even some of the evil. If I can give one instance of evil that is justifiable for God to allow, then it shows premise 1 to be false. All right? And then the argument fails, right? Because premises have to be true to get to the conclusion. That's what you have to do. And I actually can think of lots of ways God might allow evil. Well, the first, and these are sometimes called defeaters. Right? You defeat an argument, or a counter. And the first one is called the free will defense. This is the idea that people have free will. And it's not logically possible to have free will and no possibility of choosing evil. God might prefer a world in which people came into a relationship with Him. And if He wants to come into a relationship with us, a genuine, authentic relationship would have to allow free will, all right, is what you would have to do. So what's interesting about this defeater is the free will defense is asserting that if God created beings with genuine free will, He cannot make them always choose the good, because then they're not genuinely free, all right? Now, what's interesting about this, maybe we don't even have free will, as far as I know. But that's a totally different philosophical discussion, right? If God creates with free will, then that might be why evil exists, is because we're abusing that gift that God has given us, right? It might not even be the case, right, that we have free will, but if it's logically possible, it shows the premise to be false, is what it does. I like using this analogy, right? Years ago, my younger son, he started playing like pee-wee baseball. And so I went out and I was like, hey, you're pretty good at this. So I went and got him a baseball bat. I came home, I gave him the baseball bat, and he looked at it and said, well, what do I do with this? Well, we're going to practice hitting, son. That's what we're going to do. All right, now that was a good gift, because I'm a good dad, aren't I? Yes, say yes. All right, I'm a good dad, not an evil dad, a good dad. So I mean, I might be evil because I did raise them in Garland. But anyways, anyone from Garland? Exactly. All right, exactly. No one's from Garland except me. All right, so anyways, I gave him the baseball bat. Great gift. Go learn how to practice hitting baseballs with it so he can become a better baseball player. Well, the next day, I see him running around the yard chasing his older brother with the baseball bat trying to pop him in the knee. And I go, what are you doing? I said, well, you gave me the baseball bat, Dad. This is your fault. Is it really my fault? Is it really my fault? Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. That was a good gift. I didn't spank myself, at that point. I mean, he got in trouble. Now, some of you are like, that's evil. Well, okay, so maybe I have free will, and that's why I chose evil. So thanks for affirming my point, that it might be because we have free will. And so notice, if God gave us the gift of free will, like I gave my son the gift of a baseball bat, sometimes we can abuse it, and that's not God's fault. That's our fault, because he can't make you freely choose the good, because that's a contradiction. Now, some people, and especially my high school students, they go, are you telling me God can't do something? Yes, I am literally saying there are lots of things God cannot do. And here, I'm just going to pull the trump card for any Christian in the room and say, the Bible tells us very clearly there are things God can't do. Like in Titus and in Hebrews, it says God cannot lie, right? There's lots of things God can't do. God can't make a square circle, a married bachelor, someone who is made to freely choose the good. He can't make an honest politician or a useful administrator. Sorry, I'm going to get a little ahead of myself there, right? So these are logically impossible things, and that just means, that God doesn't do nonsense, because that's what contradictions refer to. Nothing, and when God does things, these aren't liabilities. God has abilities, right? And to be able to do those things would be a liability, is what it would be. All right, so this resolves the contradiction, right? Premise one is false. This argument has failed as an argument against God's existence, but I can think of several other reasons God might actually allow evil. Maybe God isn't concerned with our happiness as much as he's concerned with our holiness. He's not really concerned about, getting stuff as you developing character, right? Itself. So this is sometimes called the virtue character development, defeater or defense. Suffering develops certain character traits, right? And these are great making human attributes that we want to see develop. Like, look, if God took away danger, because that's evil, he would be taking away courage, wouldn't he? Right? If he's taking away hardship, he's taking away perseverance. If he's taking away suffering, then he's taking away patience. If he took away, learning, then he's taking away intelligence, right? And these are good things, right? Sometimes we make movies about these people, documentaries. We read books about them. We build statues sometimes to them, right? Rightly or wrongly, And God might be more concerned with developing our virtue and character than us just being sort of relatively happy as well. And here's one. I think this one is wholly implausible, but it resolves the contradiction, and that's the point. It's called the natural evil defense, because most of these I've been looking at moral evils, right? What about natural evils like hurricanes or tornadoes? So maybe there's non-human free spirit, Satan, who are responsible for all the natural evils in the world. Now, does this seem likely at all that every time there's a tornado, Satan did it? Does that seem likely? That's the wrong question. Is it logically possible? So now the premise is false, right? Is what's going on. All right? Survival defeater. Physical pain keeps us alive and from mutilating ourselves. See the interesting thing about pain? You can't really ignore it, can you? Right? And God might actually allow pain, which is evil, because it actually brings about a greater good. It keeps you alive much more effectively. Like, for example, if you couldn't feel pain and like when you put your hand on the hot stove, what do? You pull it away because it hurts. That's pain. And you saved your hand. But if you can't feel pain and you put your hand on the hot stove and you're watching The Masked Singer or something, I don't know. I don't watch that. I do not understand that show at all. And it's so gripping, and captivating that you don't realize your hand is burning, and because you don't feel pain, you're not going to know your hand is burning until you feel the burning flesh, the burning of the flesh in your nostrils, and by the time you pull your hand away, well, now it's too late, You know, I mean, you probably mutilated your hand and you won't be able to use your hand anymore. But if you feel the pain, well, it doesn't matter how interesting the conversation or TV show is. All your attention is on the pain and you yank it away and you're like, whew, you might got a burn, first degree, second degree even. It's going to heal, still got the use of your hands. At least you didn't burn through the muscles and ligaments, you know, and the like. I've even thought about like, well, why didn't God just put an alarm system in our head, you know, when we're about to hurt ourselves? Well, what do we do to alarms? I mean, raise your hand if you hit and snooze or ignored your alarm this morning when you were waking up. Anybody? Raise your hand. How many times you hit snooze?
Twice.
Twice? How many times you hit it?
Twice.
Anybody more than twice? I had a student hit it 24 times. Of course, this was second period, not first period when they were telling me this, because they missed first period. You know, is what they did. We ignore alarms, don't we? Right? I mean, when's the last time you walked, you know, through the parking lot at UTD, hear a car alarm go off and go, oh my gosh, someone's car's getting jacked. Well, if it's in Garland, the car is getting jacked, right? But that being the case, we're here at UTD. No, you just keep walking, don't you? You ignore alarms, and even if God put like an alarm system in your head, you end up ignoring it, but pain is not one of those things that you can really ignore. Especially when you don't have the pain, and then you start having the pain. You're like, whoa, what's going on? Stop. Hey, there you go. Now, is it foolproof? No, it's not. You know, it doesn't always keep you from mutilating yourself or killing yourself, you know, but it is highly, highly effective, right, is what it does. So I can think of lots of different reasons why God would allow pain, right? So in short, the logical problem of evil is a complete and unqualified failure. I cannot say anything nice about the argument. It is a really, really bad argument against God's existence, all right, is what's going on. All right, and the reason why is premise one claims too much, it's extravagant, excessive, and it's demonstrably false is what it is. It's such a bad argument that now even atheists and agnostics over the last 50, 60 years have completely abandoned the logical problem of evil as a possible argument against God's existence. Here's William Rowe, an atheist. Some philosophers have contended that the existence of evil is logically inconsistent with the theistic God. No one, I think, is succeeding in establishing such an extravagant claim. Or the agnostic Paul Draper, he is actually a philosopher of religion that professionally writes on the problem of evil. I mean, guys, this is the guy, he wakes up, goes to work, thinks about the problem of evil, reads about the problem of evil, writes about the problem of evil, publishes on the problem of evil, debates people on the problem of evil, lectures on the problem of evil. He knows more about the problem of evil than probably 99% of the people on the planet. All right? And he actually says, I don't see how it's possible to construct a convincing logical argument from evil against theism. Or J.L. Mackie from Oxford University wrote the book, The Miracle of Theism. Well, actually, it's a pretty good book on atheism. If you actually want to read some good work by an atheist, I'd read J.L. Mackie is who I'd read. All right, but he says, we atheists can see that the problem of evil does not, after all, show that the central doctrines of theism are logically inconsistent with one another. And of course, William Alston, not an atheist himself, but a philosopher, it's now acknowledged on almost all sides that the logical problem of evil is bankrupt. It's just not a good argument, all right, against God's existence. And that's why they've given it up, all right? So if you sort of go back to this graph that I showed you, got evil, two broad approaches, emotional and intellectual, and two ways to formulate an intellectual problem. There's a logical and evidential. We have multiple defeaters to the logical problem of evil. Free will defense, character virtue, natural evil, survival. And honestly, there's dozens and dozens of others, and I just don't have time to get into it. Yeah?
What was the defeater for the natural evil defense again?
The natural evil defense was maybe there's non-human free spirits, Satan, that causes all the natural disasters in the world.
Okay.
I don't think it's true, but it's logically possible.
What do you think it is then?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea. You know, it might be the case like we have to have certain natural phenomenon to actually have life occur at all. Right? Like for example, tectonic plates. You know, we need that to get certain. Look, I'm not a scientist. You know, or much less a bioscientist. You know, itself. But from what I've looked at, I mean, we need tectonic plates so we can get certain kinds of chemicals to the surface of the earth to help grow things. You know, you got to have certain kind of atmosphere which causes lightning strikes, but we have to have lightning strikes to nitrate the ground, and things like that. So, and those, once you create an environment, there's going to be evil. This is just C.S. Lewis's argument as well. Once you create an environment, actual physical environment, there's no way to get around from natural evils occurring, itself. So, but it might be the case of what we think is natural evils, like when we have a hurricane in California, but, well, is that really God's fault? They're the ones that built it. I mean, one is California. I mean, who cares? But sorry about that. I mean, I'm living in Garland. I got to do what I got to do to make me feel good about myself. All right, but they're the ones built on the fault line. You don't have to be built on the fault line. And the like. So that's one possible way to deal with it. I haven't done as much study on the natural problem of evil. There's a guy. Who's this guy? Oh, it's not Michael Ray. It's something else, but he called it Red in Tooth and Claw. That's a book you might want to read if you really want to look into the natural problem of evil. Red in Tooth and Claw, I think, is probably one of the better books on the natural. I have not read it, but I can't remember the author's name, itself. And that being the case, logical problem of evil doesn't work out too well. So let's look at the much more, I think, formidable problem, quite honestly, the evidential problem of evil. Right? And the evidential problem of evil argues that evil in the world, which seemed to lack apparent justification, God would allow these unjustified evils. Now, remember I talked about this particular type of evil. All right? And unjustified evil is the evil, pain, or suffering with no greater or compensating good attached to it. So like let me do it like this. All right? Let's say for every instance of evil in the world, I represent it with an X. Now, I'm not going to represent every instance of evil in the world, because that would be a lot of X's, is what would occur. All right? And let's say all these evils right here, that these are because we have free will. All right? And that if God took that evil away, he'd be simultaneously taking free will away. Does that make sense? And maybe like these evils, and they might even overlap, these build virtue. Right? They might even overlap at times, right? If it took that away, he's taking courage away. He takes this away, he's taking perseverance away. He take these evils away, like all these evils right here, this is a survival mechanisms, right? If he took that away, you die, So obviously, God would like you to be in a little pain instead of being dead, because that's a worse evil, because some evils we allow because they prevent even worse evils, and that would be called justified evils. This argument, the evidential problem of evil, is not concerned with these evils right here, because these evils are justified evils. They have a good reason for God to allow it. And sometimes we even go, like I said, like in surgery, elect to go under evils because they're justified, because they bring about a greater good. But this argument is not concerned with justified evils. It's concerned with these evils out here. Okay? Oh my goodness. And this is evil because it doesn't have any ink in it. Right? So it's just like it's the gift that keeps on giving, as an example. All right? So I'll just sort of do a dotted line. All right? These evils seem to be unjustified. Okay? And if God took that evil away, he's not preventing some greater good or a worse evil occurring. And that's where this argument's going to focus, is on unjustified evils. And here's how the argument runs. Premise one, if God exists, then God would not allow unjustified evil. Not all evil, just the unjustified evils. Premise two, there seems to be unjustified evil. So it seems that God does not exist. So while most agree that the belief in a good, powerful God is possible rationally with the existence of evil, many contend that the existence of such a God is improbable due to the nature of evil, or the amount of evil that we see, or the type of evil that we see about us. So given the amount of evil in the world, certainly God could prevent some of that evil without preventing a greater good. That's how the argument runs. All right. As I look at the argument, premise one, if God exists, then God would not allow unjustified evil. I think that's a reasonable statement to hold, right? That if God really did exist, he wouldn't allow unjustified evils, right? Because if he did allow unjustified evils, then we got a problem, don't we? Okay? It's sort of like this. I try to use analogies to help myself understand it. Let's say when my boys were younger, like my older son, when he was like 2 or 3 years old, we're walking down the street, we're hand in hand, having a nice father-son bonding moment, right? You know, and as any 2-year-old as being held by their father's hand, they want to escape, right? They want to let go, and he's like pulling away, and he's going to like get into the street. And I go, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Because you get in that street, you go get hit by a car, and you go to get a boo-boo, right? I mean, that's how you talk to a 2-year-old. You're going to die. You don't want to scare the kid. You're going to die. You're not going to exist anymore. What are you talking about? You know, but anyways, sorry. All right, so I go, don't do that. That's you get a boo-boo, right? So I'm preventing it, right? But what if for like the 5th or 6th time he tries to pull away from me? I go, you know what? I'm just going to teach him a lesson, right? And he pulls away, and I let him go. He goes into the street in living in Garland where there is no zoning. A big old Mack truck comes down, plows him over. Taught him. Why are you laughing? That's sick, man. That is actually pretty funny. You know, so anyways, you know, now, am I justified in allowing that? Would you say, oh yeah, you had a good reason to allow that to happen to your son, Steve? No, that's what? Unjustified. I could have prevented it. You follow me on this? Right? I could have prevented this. Now, there are times where I can't prevent evil being visited upon my boys. Like, for example, my son now lives in Atlanta, and he drives like a freaking maniac. You know, he's 25. All 25-year-olds drive like a maniac. So if you're 25, you fit the bill, you know, is what it is. But the problem is he lives in Atlanta, right? And they are crazy in Atlanta. Anybody been to Atlanta and seen Atlanta traffic? It is hard. You thought Dallas was bad? It is horrible in Atlanta. It is absolutely horrible. And if he got hurt, like he didn't stop at the red light like I taught him to, and he went through, no one's blaming me because I can't do anything about it because of my proximity. You know, I'm in Dallas, he's in Atlanta, you know, is what's going on. Even though I desire for evil not to be visited upon him. The only difference between me and God is God doesn't have those kind of limitations. That makes sense? Right? And that if he could, you know, prevent unjustified evil, he should, and it doesn't seem like he is. Because when you look around the world and see some of the horrific things that are going on, you know, just seriously, you know, gang rape of a 3-year-old baby. I mean, you got to go there. We're talking about the problem of evil, and those kind of things happen, right? The sex slave trade, you know, I mean, just those kind of things. Why does God not prevent those things? Wouldn't it be better if he actually prevented them? You know, is what's going on. It seems that if God just prevented one less, you know, heinous murder of an innocent individual, he's not taking away some greater good, right? Itself. So that's how the unjustified evil works. So when we go back to this, I don't think premise 1 is one I'm going to question. It's going to be premise 2 we need to examine. There seems to be some unjustified evil in the world. Now, how does a person defend premise 2? Yes. You want to go back to the argument?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, couldn't you also cash premise 2 out by saying there is some unjustified evil, therefore God does not exist, and it's just the logical problem restated?
Yeah, you could say that.
And that's the same.
Yeah, you could say that. But
And it would carry the same force as the first argument.
yeah, I don't know if it does.
Like logic.
You know, because you could. I could grant that. But most people are going to go, there seems to be unjustified evil as we begin to analyze how we know something is unjustified or not. You know, and where it's like, and here's where it runs, right? It runs like this. How do they know premise 2 is true, that there is unjustified evil? And this is how they argue, okay? Interestingly, when pressed on this question, one may answer as follows. We have thought about this issue for a long time, and we don't see any possible good reason for God to allow evils that exist in the world, so there probably isn't one. And this is technically called the no-see-em argument. Okay? I don't see a reason for that evil, so there probably isn't a reason. Right? Now, the question we got to ask, are no-see-em arguments any good or not? All right? Well, here's a no-see-em argument. You go to the fridge and you look for milk and you don't see any milk. And you say, there's no milk in the fridge. Is that a good no-see-em argument? Is it something I said? Was it the milk? Was it the milk?
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's all right. You know, it was that bad. My presentation was so evil, they had to leave.
We actually got another meeting at 7.
Okay, yeah, that's what you have to say to make me feel good. You know, but I understand what's going on. We'll see you. All right? So, no, but thanks for coming. I appreciate it, guys. All right? So, is that a good no-see-em argument?
I
Yes.
was gonna say maybe they have a reasonable justification.
Yeah, they might actually be right, you know. I think that's a good no-see-em argument. All right, but what about this one right here? All right? You go to the doctor, you know, for a flu shot, and as the doctor is about to jab you with the needle drops to the ground, rolls across the floor underneath the cabinets where the dust bunnies are and a dead cockroach, you know, and brushes up against the cockroach, and he rushes and he picks the needle up really quick and he blows it off, and he looks at it really carefully. I don't see any germs on the tip of that needle, so there probably isn't any, and then jab you in the arm with it. Is that a good no-see-em argument? Yeah, no, that's called medical malpractice. I get a new doctor, and they probably work in Garland, you know, if we're going to be honest. All right, so the first one is a good no-see-em argument. The second one is a bad no-see-em argument. So no-see-em arguments can be good or bad, you know, is what's going on. Now, a couple examples. I don't see an elephant in the room, so there probably isn't one. Are you confident about that?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident too. I don't see a flea in the room, so there probably isn't one. You're confident about that one. Don't look at someone's hair. That's sort of rude, right? I mean, seriously. You know, but are you confident about the second one? Probably not as much as the first one. All right, so we got to ask ourselves now, is the defense of premise 2 like looking for an elephant in the room or looking for a flea in the room? Is looking for evil as being justified or unjustified like looking for milk in the fridge? Or is it like looking for germs on the tip of a needle? Are you tracking with me on this? Right? And if it's like the first one, like looking for an elephant or looking for milk, it's a good no-see-em argument, and now we have good reason to think God does not exist, right? Or if it's like looking for germs on the tip of the needle or a flea, then it's not a good no-see-em. You're not as confident about it, okay? So, and I just said all that, all right? Now, to figure out if it's a good no-see-em or a bad no-see-em argument, there's a follow-up question. If God had a good reason for all the evils in the world, would we be at all likely to be able to figure out what it is? All right? Now, you can't just assume yes, we're in a good position. You have to demonstrate yes, you're in a good position to know if there is a reason or not for every evil in the world. All right? So to make the evidential argument stick, the atheist needs to show that the answer is yes, not just assume it. But are we really in a good position or not? It seems that the answer to me is no. One would have to be all-knowing or almost all-knowing to know if there is a reason for evil in the world or not. Sort of like a parent-to-child analogy. You know, like sometimes parents see things and they even explain to the child what's going on, and the kid just doesn't have enough cognitive ability, self-awareness, experience to even understand the answer, much less, you know, that if there is a reason behind that. You know, and the reason I think it's no is to know if there is a reason or not for every evil in the world, you would have to know about every evil in the world that has ever occurred. In the past, in the present, and in the future, wouldn't you? And like right now, we're in Richardson technically, and I know there's evil going on in Garland right now. I mean, I know it. But do I know what it particularly is? No, I don't. I mean, I mean, seriously, I'm sure there's evil going on in England right now, or in India, it's a big country, or in China, or in Mexico. There's evil, but I don't even know what those evils are right now. And if I don't know what the evil is, how much less am I going to know if there is a reason or a justification or not for every one of those evils? We're just not in a good position to know. Does this make sense to y'all? This is what I believe is a bad no-see-em argument. This is what we call admitting our limitations, okay, is what it does. You got to admit your limitations. You just don't know. Just because you don't see a reason for the evils in the world doesn't mean there is no reason for every evil in the world. Now, here's the catch with this argument, right? The catch with this argument is premise two's truth value. Remember it was, there seems to be no unjustified evil, or there is unjustified evil, however you want to put it. Its truth value is undetermined. Now, what does undetermined truth value means? We don't know if premise two is true or false. It's undetermined. Does that make sense? It could be true. It could be false. We just don't know. And this is actually technically why they call it the evidential problem of evil, all right? Is because the limitations here. Yeah.
The way you expressed it at the beginning, however, is based off of sort of a standard of semblance. And can we say that...
What do you mean by semblance? What do you mean by that?
You use the word to seem.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Since the person who's speaking, it can be relativized to that person, therefore it seems to me that they would be there. Is the truth value undetermined in that sense? I mean, I know even if it's a relative argument, then it's really not all that helpful for whether God exists in an objective sense, which is what matters, but can we make that statement about the premise when it's relativized to the person?
Premise one or premise two? Well, yeah, it would be person relative because it's not really about ontology anymore, because I think that's sort of or metaphysics, right? The logical problem of evil is what God can or cannot do, right? The metaphysics, or what God can or cannot allow. That's more of a metaphysical question. Now, this is more epistemological, right? And I think that's what you're hitting on. And again, that's why I think it's called the evidential problem of evil. It's like, well, what can we know or not know? And again, it might be the case that premise two is true. We just don't know it, okay? It might be the case that premise two is false, right? We just don't know it at this point. But here's the problem. For me, at least as a theist, I don't have to demonstrate the premise is false. It's not my argument. I'm not making the assertion. I don't bear what they call bear the burden of proof. I don't bear the burden of proof. It's the person making the assertion that there seems to be unjustified evil. They bear the burden of proof to show that it is true. I just don't know how they're going to be able to do that, with the limitations that we have to, I think we really do have to admit.
I'll try to be quick. If someone phrases it as there is unjustified evil, and conclusion would be God does not exist, that's a valid argument, would you say? Like it's philosophically, logically valid.
Yeah, if God exists, he wouldn't allow unjustified evil. There is unjustified evil, therefore God doesn't exist, yeah?
Right. So would a Christian be committed to saying premise two is false?
They could be. Yeah, I mean, they could be.
And then if that's...
Yeah, I think they would. But as a philosopher, and that's how I'm approaching it, is, I don't know.
Any Christian, they would
Yeah.
say that, well, yeah, God
It just depends, I think a Christian might want to, they don't have to say anything is true, do they? I mean, in that, at least in regards to that, I think their Christian philosophers could say, I don't know. I'd be okay with that. I'm a Christian philosopher. I don't know. I don't know if this statement's true or false.
Oh, so a Christian could then say that there is some unjustified evil?
No, I think
No, we don't know. I mean, that's what we don't know.
this is a negative argument.
All right.
So you could have a perfectly legitimate argument to believe in the existence of God, and thus you would just say this argument, premise two, would then be false,
It has
as a
to be
necessary
false.
consequence of this other argument that God does exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then a Christian
Yeah, and this is where we go to the next slide, and I think this might help.
Need to logically
Right?
do it. They're
You
assuming
don't have
it
to
from
show
another
it.
proof.
Yeah, and I think this might help as we go here, right? The evidence for prime evil, I do think it provides weak evidence against God's existence.
Okay.
I think it does. Why is it weak evidence? Because there is the possibility that premise 2 is true.
Oh,
All right, it's true. And if it's true, I think this is now evidence against God's existence. Now, I think it's pretty weak evidence. And what I mean by weak is justifiably weak. It's like, I'm not real it's about confidence level at this point, you know? And it's like, yeah, metaphysically it works, I guess, you know, as an argument structure and the like, you know, but I'm just not real, I'm not going to be like, just like, yeah, it's true. It's obviously true. I don't think even an atheist is going to say that, you know, or even, you know, I don't think anyone's really going to say that. But here's the deal. They can't say it's true, and I can't tell them it's false. So there is the possibility that it's true as far as we know. They can't demonstrate. I don't think they can, you know, but giving that there's a possibility, it's sort of like aliens. Yeah, could aliens exist? How confident are you, though? No, we just have no reason. You know what I mean? Is it possible? Absolutely. And maybe that's where we're at, you know, with this argument.
So if it is true,
There you go. All right. So therefore you don't believe in God? Is that where you went with that?
if it is true, would that disprove God's existence?
No, I don't think it would disprove. I think it would make it unlikely that God exists.
What if they phrase it as there is unjustified suffering, and if that's true?
Yeah, but now you're basing your truth. Now you're examining the truth value of a statement not as binary true/false, but levels of confidence.
Okay.
And we do that all the time. Levels of confidence, the thing like the aliens. Like there is unjustified evil. Yeah, maybe.
I'm saying if that were
Again,
to be true.
the problem is that it's so, that hypothetical is it's so hard to show that it would be true. Because you have to have that comprehensive knowledge of every effect.
I'm not asking.
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking.
Yeah, I'm
If premise 2 is true,
Yeah,
God doesn't exist.
God doesn't. That's what I'm asking.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
That's why I said as a Christian,
Yeah.
you have to say that it is false. Because if it's true,
Mm-hmm.
God doesn't exist.
Yeah, you got a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, you got a big problem.
Of course, you went back to premise 1, you said that's,
And you argue with premise one.
but most people.
Yeah, most
You argue
people
with
wouldn't.
premise one, though.
All right, so it does provide weak evidence, I think, because of the levels of confidence on things, you know, with the argument. But if the evidential problem of evil is the only evidence we had to go on, then one could be justified in believing that God probably doesn't exist. Because again, remember, it's a no-see-him type of argument. Well, I don't see it, so probably is no reason, all right? That's the only way I think you can really say the statement could be true is I don't see it, so there probably is no justification, right? But however, that's not the only evidence we have to go on, okay? We actually have other arguments for God's existence. Now, I like using the acronym COMET, you know, for 5 arguments for God's existence that I teach, right? But I'll just, C is for cosmological, right? O is ontological. Freaking best argument for God's existence ever. I love the ontological argument, right? If you don't like it, yeah, thank you very much. It's probably because you're from Garland. All right, so there you go. They got the moral argument, the existential argument, they got the teleological argument. There are dozens and dozens of arguments for God's existence, by the way. And what would have to happen is you cannot look at evidence selectively and disregard all the evidence to the contrary. See, that's intellectual dishonesty at that point. If I go, I don't think God exists because of this rather weak evidence against God's existence. Well, have you considered these? I'm not going to consider any of the arguments. This is all I need. Oh, okay. Your intellectual curiosity is overwhelming me right now, you know? I mean, seriously, you don't want to entertain possible arguments for God's existence, you know, itself. And I think in light of the evidence, it can't be shown that there are no reasons for God allowing the amount of evil we see in the world, right? Or even that it's improbable that such a reason exists. You got to look at what's called the full scope of the evidence is what you have to do. And I quite honestly think the cosmological, ontological, moral argument, the teleological are very, very strong arguments, maybe not foolproof, maybe the ontological. That might actually be a foolproof argument right there. I mean, this is freaking amazing. All right, I got a man crush on the ontological argument. Love Anselm. I'd marry him. All right, so anyways,
Anselm's feast day.
what?
Today's Anselm's feast day.
Is it really? I did not know that.
I didn't know until this morning.
That's what low Protestants get for you, ignorance. All right, so anyways, thank you for that. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to go home and celebrate Anselm Feast Day. That's freaking amazing. What do you do on Anselm Feast Day? I'm going to feast. All right, I'm going to give me some candy. All right, so anyways, that just sounds appropriate. All right, so anyways, you got to look at the full scope of the evidence is what you have to do. So if we go back to our graph, we defeated the logical problem of evil fairly soundly. And now we got a couple of defeaters to the evidential problem of evil. We have to admit limitations. How do you know there are unjustified evils? Well, I don't see it. And then the other defeater is full scope of the evidence is you got to consider all the arguments. And when they would literally have to defeat every argument against God's existence and then show that we actually have good reason to think unjustified evil exists, right, is what you would have to do. So those are the two ways you can formulate an argument against God's existence, right? The problem is, I think these are good answers for the intellectual problem of evil. But what's the problem?
People still use the problem of evil.
No, I mean they do. What? Yeah, it's the emotional problem. That's the problem. Because though I have thoroughly and convincingly convinced all of you, there are no good arguments against God's existence intellectually, you still got to go deal with your crap, is what you have to do. All right? And intellectual arguments don't answer emotional experiences, right? Is what's going on. Is this making sense to y'all? Now, I am not an expert on dealing with the emotional problem of evil, right? And these are counselors, pastors, people that actually understand other people, which I don't. I don't understand y'all at all, right? And like the intellectual problem of evil, it makes a lot more sense to me, but the emotional problem of evil, that's a much headier one, right? But I think that it's important that lots of times people will present the emotional problem of evil as if it is the intellectual problem, but it's not. And they tend to do this in one of two ways, I've noticed. And this is just my observations. I haven't completely analyzed this and researched it, but I've noticed that lots of times when people talk about the problem of evil, they don't want to formulate an argument. They'll do something like this. They'll ask a really hard question, like, why does God allow cancer in children? So they put a question, or they just give like horrific examples like that. Why does God allow gang rape? Right? Usually it's in the form of a question. A couple things. Questions are not arguments. That's real important to understand. Okay? Questions are not arguments. Now, I'm not saying questions are bad. No, those are good questions. I'd like to know the answer to them. But tends to be my advice. If someone comes up to me and says, why does God allow gang rape of a 3-year-old baby? I'm not going to go, well, maybe God gave people free will and maybe you just have limitations. I sound like a freaking fool, don't I? Don't I? I sound like an idiot at that point. Because how would I know that? See, I really do need to admit my limitations and literally say, I don't know. Now, let me pause. Just because I don't know the answer, is that evidence against God's existence? My ignorance is not evidence. You follow me on this? All right? It's a good question, all right? And questions aren't arguments. What I would say is when they present, I would agree. That is horrific. I wish those kind of things would not occur. I agree with you. And we ought to do what we can to stop those kind of things. But how is this evidence against God's existence? How are you going to, see what I'm doing? I'm trying to go back to the intellectual problem, right? And go, can you formulate an argument? I mean, obviously, you've affirmed premise 2 in the logical problem of evil. Evil exists, all right? I agree with you on that. And that is not what's under question. Now, can you formulate an argument? And I try to push them back to the intellectual problem of evil. And I think these are the two ways that you can do it, the logical and the evidential. And I don't think either one of those are rather successful. Logical, definitely not. Evidential, pretty weak argument, if that, right, to what it is. But that's usually what they tend to do, is like give a horrific example or ask a really difficult question. And those aren't arguments. They have to formulate an argument. That's what they have to do. Any other questions as we wrap this up? Yeah.
When somebody asks a question like that, aren't they essentially giving a version of the evidential argument, but maybe they just haven't read like this exactly?
They might, but that's why I'd want to push them that direction. Say, let's formulate one. Let's see if we can formulate one. I might help them out in the process. I think because we want to think clearly, don't we? Right? We don't want our emotions to cloud our reasoning, because emotions aren't a good, clear methodology of finding the truth of such matters. I'm not saying emotions are bad. Emotions are good things. They can lead us to greatness, to do good things, or to react properly to bad things. That's the role of the emotions. But emotions aren't going to necessarily lead you to the truth of the matter. So I think it was C.S. Lewis who, I think it was The Abolition of Man. I could be wrong about this, but he said logic is going to determine which side you're going to fight on in a war or in a battle, but it's emotions that are going to make you charge the enemy line. I mean, no one's going to charge the enemy line for a syllogism, But I mean, if you think of like, oh gosh, what was that? Braveheart? Was that William Wallace? Was that the William Wallace movie in Scotland? When he got in, he said one word. What was the one word? Freedom, right? Not a syllogism, But man, it got me excited. I'm like, I don't even know what they're fighting for. Let's go, That's what's going on. But it's going to be reason and logic that determines which side is right or which side is wrong, That's what you need to do. But thanks so much for your questions, pushing me. You got another question? Yeah.
Let me do one more. So for the defeater number 5, the admit limitations. So like you're saying that we can't be confident enough in knowing that something is not going to bring about a greater good. Does that diminish our confidence in our everyday ability to try to enact the good in the world? Like, how do we know that, if the murder of someone might bring about some greater good, how do we know that stopping a murder is not stopping a greater good? Like, it seems to limit our confidence in like how we.
Yeah. I mean, we face those kind of problems all the time. Yeah.
So like, I don't know. It just seems. I don't know. It seems troublesome, I guess.
Oh, I would agree. That is troublesome. Yeah, I would be troublesome. And we face those kind of quandaries all the time, is what we have to do, it's the trolley problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go ahead. He's been talking all freaking night. He's from Garland.
Yeah, to follow up
All
on
right, go ahead.
I just want, did you refer to like pain as evil?
There's a distinction between pain, evil, and suffering that I'm not addressing tonight. I'm sort of grouping them all together under the category of evil, but technically there is a distinction between evil, pain, and suffering.
More of like a consequence.
It could be, it might not be.
Pain can be.
Pain tends to be, and it depends on what kind of pain you're talking about. You're talking about physical pain or emotional pain. Those are two different kinds of pain, obviously. But pain, yeah, that might be a way to look at pain, as a consequence. Evil as a category, an ontological kind of category. And suffering is, I think, much more akin to the emotional experience of a pain or an evil, that someone is going through.
Whiteboard behind you, that can be used for good or evil.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
pain
so-
can be with the surgeon.
But in my presentation tonight, I didn't make those distinctions. I didn't feel like it was necessary. But I do agree, yes, there are distinctions between those. I haven't explored them very in-depthly, but I just know there is a distinction. All right. Well, thanks so much. I'll turn it over to y'all. I appreciate the time that you've given me to talk about pain and evil and suffering. So hopefully you have a good Anselmian feast day. So.